Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I said on this platform that the Greeks were right, the ancient Greeks, who gave mankind democracy, a government of the people, for the people, by the people. They were right in that democracy only works when the electorate is educated, knowledgeable, and diligent at holding those in positions of power and authority to account. You look at the Zimbabwe history, Zimbabwe is in this mess for many reasons. And one of them has got to be that we've got one of the most ignorant, naive, and gullible electorate this side of the grave. And as long as that remains, there really is no hope of the country getting out of the mess we find ourselves in. The last day, the nation has been engrossed, engaged with a statement that Nelson Chamisa gave regarding the issue of the 2023 elections. And one would expect that the newspapers would help in performing the task of educating the voters. Alas, that is not the case in the case of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's media, to be quite honest, for the last 44 years has been dominated by the ZANU-PF controlled public media. Probably of most other countries in the region, Zimbabwe has got the fewest television broadcast stations locally. And radio stations. The newspapers, there are very few independent newspapers. The newspaper I'm referring to here is supposed to be one of the few independent ones. But one wonders of that qualification because most of them are directly or indirectly controlled by the ZANU-PF ruling elite. And therefore, then the purpose of the media performing its important task of educating the voters is highly compromised in Zimbabwe. The nation had the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms, which would have freed the media during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. Unfortunately, as I've said before, not even one token reform was implemented. And so the opportunity was lost. Indeed, as far as Morgan Tsvangirai, the leader of the MDC, was concerned, the one thing he was pushing hard for in terms of media reform was that the public media should stop calling him a puppet, which they dutifully did for a few weeks until I'm sure somebody whispered in their ears and reminded them who pays their bill, their salaries. They didn't need more than that. And it was back to business as usual. And so the media, I've got to say, in Zimbabwe has been elect down for the nation. They really have failed to perform their task of educating the electorate. Let's consider this article. This article is supposed to be based on Chamisa calls for protests, says Zimbabwe is too beautiful to destroy. Chamisa spans calls for protests. Was the headline. It was supposed to be based on what Chamisa himself had said in his statement today. I've covered the statement before. And the number one primary purpose of that statement was for Chamisa to clarify the issue of SADC. Ever since the August last year election, Chamisa had said he wasn't going to challenge the election results, which he said ZANU-PF had rigged, in the Constitutional Court, as he had done in 2018, because this time he was going to let SADC do the task. And so for the last 9 months, Chamisa has been claiming that he is putting pressure on SADC for the regional body to resolve the disputed elections. In his statement today, he has made it very clear that SADC was not doing that. While all along he has claimed and leaked information into the media at various points, saying SADC leaders were meeting to discuss the disputed elections, and at one point you even reported that SADC elders were coming to Zimbabwe to meet Mnangagwa and Chamisa himself to resolve this issue. And yet today, when he gave that statement, he made it very clear that in September last year, after the elections, he wrote to SADC to complain about direct elections. And all SADC did was respond to that and say they'll look into the matter. That was a month later in October. And ever since, SADC have not said anything else. We know that SADC leaders met, discussed the rigged election, the report by the regional body's own election observer team, who condemned the elections, and they made the decision that SADC will adopt that report, that damning report. But ever since, SADC and the Secretariat has not communicated anything else, which everybody else said, well, okay, the only thing we can read from that is that SADC is not going to do anything. And Chamisa and some of his operatives have been promoting the idea that they are putting more and more pressure under SADC to do something, and they are making progress. There are many occasions when a long article was leaked into the social media claiming to coming from somebody, a very reliable source in the SADC Secretariat, that SADC is doing something about it. His statement on the 27th of May clearly shows that there'd never been none of those communications. Those so-called leaked reports were fake. The latest one, a few weeks ago, even claimed that SADC was going to organize fresh elections in June. And I think it was that has forced Chamisa to finally come out in the open. And in his statement, he clearly makes it very clear that there was no such communication from SADC to that effect. And so this whole article, if one was to read through it, and if you had not had the opportunity to read the report, you would think that SADC, Chamisa is saying he is re-engaging SADC with the view of putting pressure on SADC to do something about Zimbabwe's rigged elections. Chamisa has pinned hopes on Southern African Development Cooperation, SADC's intervention to resolve the crisis after the regional body discredited the August poll. If you read that, and that's all they are relying on, you would think that the re-engagement with SADC is still going on. So the reports that Chamisa had been giving all along of SADC putting pressure on Mnangagwa and so forth are still on. Whereas in reality, that is exactly what the statement clearly stated. After admitting that all those previous claims were fake, but he's still going to re-engage with SADC. He, of course, is free to re-engage, to continue re-engagement with SADC. But SADC have made it very clear. He has made several efforts to chase his report, what is happening, and SADC have completely ignored him. And therefore, then he can claim, we can make all these outrageous claims that he's still pinning his hopes on SADC resolving it. SADC are not going to resolve this issue. They've discussed it, they have accepted the damning report, and they've done nothing about it. And it's now 9 months since the elections. And many people have explained to Chamisa why SADC probably take that view. And therefore, then for the newspaper, a reputable newspaper, supposedly independent, and supposedly there to try to educate the electorate, to ignore those facts on the ground and tell the electorate that Chamisa is re-engaging with SADC is mischievous, to say the least. What is more, as much as Chamisa himself is the one who is making the claim that he doesn't want the people to engage in violence, he wants you to follow peaceful means to achieve political change in Zimbabwe. One still has to agree to accept. But in this particular case, that claim is irrelevant, to say the least. Chamisa participated in the 2023 elections. without any reforms being implemented. He knew the electoral process is flawed. He knew that by participating, he will give ZANU-PF legitimacy. But he also knew that ZANU-PF was giving away a few gravy train seats to entice those willing to participate to give the regime legitimacy. That has nothing to do with violence. So why are we bringing the issue of violence in here? This is a typical opposition gimmick. He wants to pretend that violence has got everything to do with this election and why Zimbabwe is this political paralysis. It has got nothing to do with it. Nobody has asked Chamisa or the opposition to participate in any violent act. All they've been asking for, all they've warned Chamisa about all along, including SADC itself, is that do not participate in flawed elections. And it is Chamisa himself who has insisted in participating in those flawed elections. So the issue of violence is totally irrelevant. It's a red herring. Why a newspaper that is, or that should be, helping to inform the Zimbabwe electorate, educate them, so that they become aware of what is going on, is deliberately throwing these red herrings as belief. A whole article, that is the headline. Chamisa spans protest. Why would you want to resort to protest? You participated in these flawed elections, knowing, in fact, in this particular case, Chamisa himself was the one who said he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. One of the reasons why SADC really has been helpless to do anything in this case for Zimbabwe is that no sooner was the election results announced, CCC imploded. He himself, in January, left the party in a huff, claiming that it had been infiltrated by ZANU-PF. So if the opposition is completely imploded, as much as SADC would have wanted to do something to deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy, the question would be, even if they did that, who are they going to work with other than just ZANU-PF itself? The newspapers should educate the electorate, not brainwash them. I think it is a pity that papers, publications like Newsday have again and again on many occasions failed to address the issues that will help educate the voters. I think the headlines of that article is mischievous, to say the very least. This is a very important issue. It has got far-reaching ramifications for the country. The issue here is that Chamisa and company participated in 2023 elections without any reforms being implemented. They knew that participating in flawed elections would only give ZANU-PF legitimacy. They participated out of greed. When the election results came out, Chamisa claimed that the elections were rigged, as if he had not been warned, as if he didn't know that they were going to be rigged. This is just a repeat of what we've seen again and again. You participate out of greed, you win a few seats, you take those seats, and then you complain that the elections were rigged for the purposes of pleasing your constituency. The damage has already been done. You have already given ZANU-PF legitimacy. What we are seeing here is Chamisa preparing the ground to launch a new party, tell his brainwashed followers that this time he will win those elections hands down. They will participate again. The elections will be rigged. He will complain that they were rigged, but the damage is done. Zimbabwe is a failed state, and all because for the last 44 years we've failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. We should focus on getting those reforms implemented. That should be our focus. But when we get to talking about reforms, the whole conversation is undermined by somebody claiming that they can win rigged elections. We need to hold those people to account when they make such outrageous statements. When they claim that SADC is sorting out this problem, and for 9 months keep feeding people on false information that SADC is doing something. Yes, next month you will see something. Change is on the way. And then nothing happens. June, yes, June, there's going to be fresh elections. Then when you realize nothing is going to happen, you come up with a statement and then admit for the first time that SADC never gave you that statement, never gave you that assurance. And then the newspaper takes that statement and reports on the wrong thing altogether. Misinforming the people. We have got to break this cycle of participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy and then complaining about it. After 44 years of rigged elections, surely we must now be able to define what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections, get those reforms implemented so that we can finally have free, fair, and credible elections. That is not rocket science. Why that should be so difficult for some people to understand beggars belief. Why it should be so difficult for those who are supposed to be educators, educating the populace, the journalists, why they should keep on reporting on superficial issues and leave out the real big issues of the day, beggars belief. No wonder so many of our people are ignorant, naive, and gullible. When those who are supposed to be educating you are letting you down, what do you expect? I'd like to conclude by playing this. I think this is an important video by Dr. Neves Mumba. He was the chairperson of the SADC election observer mission last year. And that team's report is very clear that the elections were flawed and illegal. And the report itself is a foundation, is a basis on which we can build the pressure on reforms must be implemented before elections. And it is a basis on which we can educate our people so that they are not so gullible as to be told by Chamisa and others that they will win rigged elections. And when they have failed, they don't even apologize. They go on to something else. We've got to break this cycle. So I'll finish by playing the video by Dr. Neves Mumba.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, there is a comparison, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report. And then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, they're coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor, it starts not during the day of elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election. And they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that the electoral commissions and the governments in those countries abide by international norms in holding democratic elections. And this fight must be more vicious before the election comes.
Exactly. And one of our starting points is having a media that is prepared to do its job, educate the electorate, not brainwash them. Chamisa's statement was about admitting that he had been lying these last 9 months about SADC helping to resolve Zimbabwe's electoral dispute. SADC had washed his hands, and he knows it. And people have tried to explain to him why SADC had washed his hands of Zimbabwe. And those are the issues that we must address, not sweep them under the carpet. And the media have got a duty to the nation to educate them on those issues too, and not help the politicians sweep those issues under the carpet. Chamisa is trying to sweep the problems under the carpet. SADC has done its best. SADC gave Zimbabwe the opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU. Chamisa and company failed to implement even one reform. Chamisa and company have been participating in flawed elections since the GNU out of greed. Those are the issues that we must address. To participate in a flawed elections when you have handed over legitimacy to the ruling party, you turn around and expect the regional body to clean up the mess. How? When they advised you, you did not listen. They've just produced a report that clearly said those elections were flawed. You must implement the reforms. That is what Dr. Mumba is saying there. And yet, our friend is preparing already to participate in 2028 with not even one reform implemented. And no doubt you blame SADC for it. This nonsense must stop. We are not going to have another rigged election because the opposition sold out. We are not going to have another rigged election because the people who are entrusted with the task of educating the electorate are brainwashing them. That is totally unacceptable. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope we'll keep on engaging in this dialogue. And I hope that 2028 will be the first free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe's history. It is achievable. We can fight for those reforms. We already know what those reforms are. We only focus on them and start giving excuses for not doing anything. Thank you very much again, and have a good night.